Hi everyone, and welcome to the final lesson of day 5 here at Cyber School. We'll be joining James again for an introduction to threat modeling. Really cool lesson today, and actually a key part of any cybersecurity professional's repertoire. We're going to be looking at threat modeling Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. from the Marvel Universe. It's going to be pretty cool. And then your project for today will be performing a threat model of your own on pretty much any system you want. We've got some recommendations, but maybe Doctor Who's TARDIS, a cupboard, a postman. It's up to you. You can literally threat model anything. Look, we've really enjoyed delivering live content to you guys this week. We've hit 1,000 subscribers, had over 8,000 viewers tune in, and more than 1,000 projects have been completed. It's absolutely superb to see. So if you like what you've seen, please send in a tweet, reach out on LinkedIn, and just give us a virtual high five. Just a massive shout out to all the volunteers this week. So Lorna, Graham, Hannah, James and Tom, you guys have absolutely rocked it, giving up your time to produce content for the students all around the world. So look guys, have fun, stay safe and have a great weekend. See you soon.
Hello and welcome back for my last lesson of the week for Cyber School, and I'll be talking about threat modelling. So first I'm going to tell you a bit about me and a bit about why I think threat modelling is something you should be interested in and should learn. My name is James Bohr. I like codes and lockpicking. Sometimes I get very tired, and I work in cybersecurity, and I work in cybersecurity full time. I'm not a pen tester, so I don't do the type of things you've been learning in the ethical hacking modules, except as a bit of fun now and then. I like codes and lockpicking, they're two of my hobbies, and yes, I do get very tired. So, what is threat modelling and why do I think it's interesting and you should learn it? Threat modelling is something I use every single day. If you think about your ethical hacking, to do that properly, what you're really building before you do it is a plan, and that plan could be a threat model. So, a threat model is anything designed to look at dangers to a system, dangers to whatever you're trying to model. In this case, obviously the threat model wasn't sufficient, and so you can see what happened instead. So that's what we're trying to prevent with a threat model. Now the threat model doesn't prevent it itself. It's simply a tool for thinking about the risks to the system. So what can we threat model? Well, as I think Jonathan's already told you, just about anything. I mentioned a cupboard, and yes, you could threat model a cupboard. You could threat model a postman or a postman's walk. Your threats there might be dogs and sharp letterboxes. So yes, we can threat model anything, but today I'm going to introduce you to it by threat modelling S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, hopefully you've heard of S.H.I.E.L.D. They're in all of the Marvel movies, or most of the Marvel movies, and we'll talk about what they do, what their job is, and what the risks to their system is. But before we do that, we need to decide what a threat is. Well, a threat is anything that poses a danger to the system, and this is the important bit, is outside your control. So if you can control it, it's not a threat, it's a risk. The threat is what causes that risk, and you cannot control. So in the case of S.H.I.E.L.D., well, that's the bad guys, Red Skull, Loki, Thanos and Ranos. Easy enough. So how do we do threat modelling? Well, firstly, we need to decide what the goal of the system is. So with a postman's walk, the goal of the system would be to deliver letters and for him to get back safely, or her to get back safely. With a cupboard, it might be to safely store medicines. With S.H.I.E.L.D., we've got someone who can help us with that, and they'll do that just in a moment. The next thing you do, once you've worked out the goal or the objectives, is to decide what your assets are. Now, again, with the postman, this might be the postman himself or herself, the bag of post, and the map showing the walk. With the cupboard, it might be a lock on the door, It might be strong doors, it might be the hooks that hold it onto the wall, because if those go, the cupboard's not going to do its job very well. With Shield, we'll talk about what those are in a minute. And the other thing you have to do when you're working out your assets, which are the things that matter, are which ones are critical, which ones are your most important ones. If you lose them, what would happen to your business? If, for example, you do printing a lot, then colour printing might not be your most important one. You might be able to get away with black and white printing for a while. But if you lose all printing, that could be a much bigger problem. So that would be a critical asset. Then we move on and we determine what our trust zones are. And it's an odd way to describe it, but your trust zone is just what you do and don't trust. In your house, you might trust everyone living there. You might not trust them all. You might have a lodger and say, well, they're outside of the family trust zone, but they're still in the house trust zone, which is more trusted than everything outside the house. You might have an Alexa and say, well, Alexa is completely outside my trust zone because she was rude to me that time. So we need to decide on the trust zones. Once we've got the trust zones and we know what our assets are, anytime something crosses between trust zones, it introduces what we call a vulnerability. And that's because you're going from a more trusted to a less trusted area. Even if it's going from, say, your house to your friend's house, it's got to go outside first. That introduces a vulnerability. If it's a phone call to your friend's house, it's going over a network you don't control and don't necessarily trust. It's going over the phone lines. So that's a potential vulnerability. And threats exploit vulnerabilities. So that's why we care about where these holes in your trust zones or in your trust zone boundaries are. Then we list out the threats to your system and work out which vulnerabilities they might exploit. And finally, we score the risks. And all this means is normally we do it with a number, but you can do it with words. We say how likely the risk is to happen and how bad it would be if it did happen. So, with Shield, what are our objectives? Well, as I said, I've got a friend here who will help me describe that. And, okay, that's a fairly simple explanation. So it's protection, whether that's against an alien invasion from another universe or one man against himself, Tony Stark. Broad job description, but at least it's a very simple mission, very simple objective. What are our assets as Shield? What is it that we use to do this? Okay, well, yes, we have helicarriers, we have fighter jets, we have little cars, we have people, Shield agents, we have a giant Iron Man mech, we have a Hulk, although whether that's an asset or a threat or a mixture of the two is a different question. So all of these things are things we could count as assets. There's a Captain America down here, for example, and he's an asset right up until he goes rogue in the Civil War. And of course there's a building on the right, which is a nice important building, could be an asset, might be something in a different trust zone because it's the Avengers building. And what do we depend on of these assets as Shield? Now, Shield is a global organisation. It operates in just about every country. It uses a lot of advanced technology, it has a lot of people, and I guarantee you there's a lot of things that those people do. So what we depend on are all of the people, all of the technology, and all of the processes. And you'll find these words come up a lot when we're talking about security or risk. People are employees and customers and anything else or anyone else. Technology is any of the tools that aren't human, very simple. And processes are things that one does to the other. So it's mainly things that people do to technology. Sometimes it's things that technology does to other technology. That's been set up by people, but it's still a process and it's now independent of people. And these are the things that we look at and define as assets. There is one other type of asset, and this comes up in information security, and the asset is information assets. Now, the reason we're not looking at them for this threat model is because the technology, people and processes provide the boundary, provide the containers and provide the walls around that information. So if we threat model the system, we are automatically including the information in that. You can do threat modelling against just information, but because of the way that SHIELD works, because it's a very physical organisation and we're looking at the whole organisation, I'm leaving out information for now because it can get a bit complicated and abstract. So, as SHIELD, what can we trust? Well, not him, obviously. But we might say we trust all of our employees, or all of our employees who've got some sort of security badge, or all of our employees and the Avengers. I mean, I wouldn't recommend trusting the Avengers, but SHIELD did for a while. And what are our threats? We've been over this one with the bad guys, and of course normal criminals who might have found some teleporter technology or some alien technology and are using it to rob banks. They would be a SHIELD threat, and if you've watched the series you probably know what I'm talking about. Once you've got all of those, you write them all down, and you can do this while you're working them out as well. So you write down your objectives, you write down your trust zones, your assets, your threats, and work out how those threats will exploit vulnerabilities in your assets. Now, for someone like SHIELD, that's going to be a very long list, so fortunately I've got a whole office of people to help me write it down, but we'll just look at a few of them now. Hydra. Hydra is very definitely a threat to SHIELD. They've done stuff before, so I'm going to introduce you to some new terms. These are not ones you have to use, they're just ones that we normally do so that if I'm talking to someone else in security, we understand each other straight away. So there's threat origin. All that means is where the threat is coming from, what's causing it. Well, with Hydra, it's a deliberate threat. They definitely want to, actively want to, hurt SHIELD and take over the world. The next one is threat agents, and that's who or what is directly causing the threat. With Hydra, it's both people inside SHIELD and outside SHIELD. So that's both what we call insider threat and outsider threat. Hybrid threat, a mix of the two, if you like. They've definitely infiltrated SHIELD, we know that, and they also definitely exist outside it. The likelihood, well, it's happened. It's definitely happened. We know it's happened. I saw the documentary, or film, whichever you want to call it. So the likelihood is certain. And the impact, I'm just going to say it's really bad. Now, for likelihood and impact, we'd normally have numbers, or we might have certain set words, such as low, medium, and high. I'm just using these to show that you can use anything that makes sense to you, particularly if you're just doing this to learn. Next threat, well, Thanos. I'm sure some of you at least have seen the threat that he posed, so again, the threat origin is deliberate. He definitely meant to pose a threat and would still mean to. The threat agents, not really insider at all, not really outsider, to be honest, because I'm going to say that anything outside of the Earth counts as alien. So I'm putting the threat agent down as alien in this case. The likelihood, certain, it did happen, it has happened. Okay, it hasn't happened anymore, but it did definitely will have happened, or whatever words we can use to deal with time travel. And the impact, I may have exaggerated a bit. It's not necessarily world ending, but wiping out half the population of the universe probably comes close. And we have an example threat here of Fred. Now, Fred is an insider. He's actually quite a good employee. We trust him. And the threat origin in this case is not deliberate. Fred doesn't want to cause harm, but unfortunately Fred gets confused between petrol and diesel. So the threat here is that Fred fills up the helicarrier with diesel instead of petrol. The likelihood is medium because it's perfectly possible it could happen, and the impact is also medium. And remember this threat because we'll come back to it later. And it's medium because there's a chance he could do it, but it's not definite. And the impact is medium because if he does it, it is only one helicarrier. We have got more. It's unfortunate, it's difficult, it poses some challenges, but it's not an absolute disaster. So, final example threat we'll look at is Ultron. So the threat origin here is negligence. It was someone who we trust, one of our employees as such, who didn't take the proper precautions. The threat agent is an insider. You may know his name. I'm not going to say it because I don't like to pin blame for things on people. But yeah, we all know who it is. And the likelihood is certain. Again, it's happened. An island was lifted up and, okay, not dropped, but was going to be dropped. And Ultron wanted to end the world as we know it. So, once we've got our threats and our vulnerabilities, we know what risk we have. And the next thing we do is deal with risk. So we'll go through how we might deal with the different risks. Let's start with Ultron. First option is to avoid the risk. And really, the best way of avoiding a risk is to run away really fast. But often you can't do that if you're running a business or trying to save the world. So in that case, avoiding the risk would be changing what you're doing so that you're not facing it anymore. We can't really do that with Ultron at all. It's just not an option. Second one would be to transfer the risk. Well, this is what S.H.I.E.L.D. actually did. They transferred the risk to the Avengers. They said, it's your problem now, good luck. So that's one way we can deal with risk. We can simply give it to someone else, so long as we know that they'll be able to deal with it, or know that they'll be able to deal with it better than us. Next one, and this is where we'll get back to Fred, is to mitigate the risk. This is where we put in some work to make the risk less. So with Fred, what we've done is we've put a sticker on the helicarriers where the petrol intake is, just saying petrol only. Fred's read that, and that's meant that the likelihood of Fred putting the wrong fuel in has gone from medium to low. And with it being low, we've decided we can do the last thing, which is just shrug our shoulders and accept the risk. If we completely remove all risk, we can't do business. If we wanted to say, well, we don't want any chance of damage to the helicarriers, we wouldn't fly them, we wouldn't even build them. So we have to accept some risk in order to do things. And now it's your turn. So what you need to do is pick a system, work out the objectives, the goals of that system, whatever it is, work out what the assets are and which of those are critical assets, work out where your trust zones are, whether things are trusted or not. On the worksheet I've just got trusted yes or no, so you can start off with one trust zone, but if you want to add more, you could just use A, B, C, or untrusted, or U, things like that to say that you're doing multiple trust zones. Then we identify our threats and which vulnerabilities they will act on. And finally we score the risks, and we can do that whether it's using numbers from 1 to 10, whether it's saying unlikely, likely, certain, or whether it's saying low, medium or high. So long as you use the same terms every time you're looking at a risk and you understand those terms, that's fine. You will find if you do threat modelling or risk management later that different places have their own words for things and their own scores, but they can be interchanged in the same way that we did with alphabets in the cryptography classes. So just some example systems that you could use to get started with, and you don't have to use one of these, it's just to give you some ideas. We could say some sort of blue time travelling device. That would be an example. What threats might that face? Daleks, maybe? We could say some sort of moon-sized space station which blows up planets, and there obviously a vulnerability would be a large vent hole down which someone could drop a missile which would blow up the whole thing. but there might be others as well. We could say a theme park with the dinosaurs. Now, I can't imagine what could possibly go wrong there, but I'm sure you'll think of some things. We could say that we're going to do some sort of underground mine from maybe a 3D game of some kind. And weird as it sounds, our threat there might be green things walking out of the darkness and blowing up. So the vulnerability would be that they can get to our mine. So how would you mitigate that? How would you close that down? We could have some sort of castle, and your threats here will depend on what sort of ruler you are. If you're a good, kind ruler, then it's likely to be the evil queen or the evil king next door. If, on the other hand, you're an evil ruler yourself, it might be your own people or heroes. And we could say a pirate ship. A pirate ship is a system. It's got its own objectives to get lots of loot and rum. And it's got threats. The Navy, as an example. Right. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy the assignment. Remember, you can do threat modelling on anything you want. So have fun with it, and let me know how it goes on Twitter.